The stars above Earth shimmered like broken glass as massive ships dropped out of hyperspace. Admiral Zexkar watched from his command bridge as his fleet materialized around the blue planet that had been silent for 2,000 years. His three hearts beat with anticipation as he studied the tactical displays showing Earth's defenses. There were none. No orbital stations bristling with weapons. No energy shields protecting the planet's surface. No fleet of warships rising to meet them. Just a quiet world with scattered cities and what looked like primitive communication towers dotting the continents. "Sir, we're detecting minimal electromagnetic activity from the surface," reported Captain Veltar, his tactical officer. The Kethmori warrior's biomechanical implants pulsed with green light as he processed the sensor data. "Their technology appears to be several centuries behind our own." Zixkar nodded, his elongated skull gleaming under the bridge's harsh lighting. This was exactly what he had expected. Every piece of intelligence his people had gathered about Earth suggested that humanity had either destroyed itself or regressed to a primitive state. The complete radio silence from their home world for the past 2 millennia had confirmed what most galactic civilizations already believed: humans were extinct or irrelevant. "Begin standard intimidation protocol," Zexkar commanded. His voice carried the authority of someone who had conquered 17 star systems and brought entire civilizations to their knees. "Broadcast our terms across all frequencies." The message was simple and had proven effective countless times before. "Submit to Kethmori rule or face complete annihilation. No negotiations. No mercy, just the cold mathematics of superior firepower." Meeting inferior resistance. Lieutenant Kex Valoom, the communications officer, activated the transmission array. "Broadcasting now, Admiral. All human communication networks should be receiving our message." Zexkar settled back into his command chair, which had been grown from living metal and shaped to accommodate his massive frame. He had delivered this same ultimatum to the Terran Coalition, the Helix Confederation, and dozen other species. The response was always the same: first denial, then desperate attempts at negotiation, followed by futile resistance, and finally complete surrender. But as the minutes passed, something unusual happened. Instead of panicked transmissions or desperate pleas for mercy, Earth responded with silence. Not the terrified silence of a world frozen in fear, but the calm silence of someone who had heard an interesting joke and was deciding whether to laugh. "Sir," Kexvolum said, his voice carrying a note of confusion, "we're receiving a response." "Display it," Zexkar ordered. The main viewing screen flickered to life, showing the interior of what appeared to be a simple office. Behind a wooden desk sat a human male who looked to be in his 50s. His hair was graying at the temples, and he wore clothes that seemed remarkably ordinary for someone facing an alien invasion. He was smiling. "Greetings," the human said, his voice warm and friendly. "My name is Jack Morrison, and I serve as Director of the Earth Defense Council. Welcome to Earth. We've been expecting you." Zexkar's primary heart skipped a beat. In all his years of conquest, no species had ever claimed to be expecting the Kethmori fleet. Most civilizations spent their final hours in desperate preparation or hopeless prayer. This human spoke as if he were greeting old friends. "You received our terms of surrender?" Zexkar demanded, leaning forward in his chair. Morrison nodded pleasantly. "Oh yes, we received them. Very thorough. I particularly liked the part about complete subjugation and the harvesting of our resources. It's quite similar to the terms we received from the Vorthan Empire about 800 years ago." The bridge fell silent. Every Kethmori officer turned to stare at the screen. The Vorthan Empire had been one of the most powerful civilizations in known space, capable of destroying entire star systems with their reality-warping technology. They had vanished mysteriously over 6 centuries ago, leaving behind only empty worlds and unanswered questions. "You claim to have encountered the Vorthan Empire?" Zexkar asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Encountered them?" Morrison chuckled softly. "We have their complete historical records archived in our libraries. Fascinating people, though their approach to diplomacy left something to be desired. They were much more direct than you are." No preliminary threats, just immediate. Planet crackers. Captain Veltar moved closer to his admiral. Sir, this is impossible. The Vorthan Empire, controlled sectors of space thousands of light years from Earth. There's no way a primitive species could have had contact with them. Morrison seemed to hear the whispered conversation, despite the fact that their communications were supposedly one way. I can understand your confusion, Captain. Your intelligence networks are quite good, but they focus primarily on civilizations that make noise. We found that staying quiet often provides better information than broadcasting your intentions across the galaxy. Zexkar felt a chill run down his spine. This human not only knew about the Vorthan Empire, but had somehow overheard their private conversation. Either Earth possessed technology far beyond what their scans indicated, or this was some elaborate bluff designed to buy time. You will explain how a backwater species gained access to Vorthan records, Zexkar commanded, his voice taking on the harsh tone that had made entire worlds tremble. Morrison's smile never wavered. Oh, we didn't gain access to their records, Admiral. We created them. The Vorthan kept meticulous documentation of their activities, which made our job much easier. When they arrived at Earth, they were kind enough to share their entire database with us, quite helpful for our research. The human paused, glancing at something off-screen. Speaking of research, our xenobiology department is very interested in your biomechanical integration. The neural interface protocols you're using are remarkably stable, much more refined than what the Grimari Collective achieved. This time, Zexkar couldn't hide his shock. The Grimari Collective had been the Kethmorius' greatest rival, a species of hive-minded warriors who had conquered half the Andromeda Galaxy before mysteriously disappearing. Their technology had been centuries ahead of anyone else's, and their biomechanical augmentations had been considered the pinnacle of military engineering. The Grimari Collective has been extinct for over 400 years, Zexkar said slowly. Extinct is such a final word, Morrison replied thoughtfully. They certainly stopped expanding their territory around that time, though I should mention that their approach to biological integration was fundamentally flawed. They never solved the neural cascade problem that occurs after the third generation of implants. Every officer on the bridge stared at the screen in stunned silence. The neural cascade problem was classified information that only the highest levels of Kethmori command knew about. It was the primary reason their own biomechanical program had taken centuries to develop, and the solution they had found was considered one of their greatest military secrets. How do you know about neural cascades? Zexkar whispered. Morrison's expression became slightly apologetic. I'm afraid that's rather a long story, Admiral. Perhaps we should arrange a more formal meeting to discuss these matters properly. I'm sure you have many questions, and we have quite a bit to share with you. The human stood up from his desk, and for the first time, Zexkar noticed something that made his blood run cold. On the wall, behind Morrison, hung what appeared to be a collection of artifacts. Ship components, weapon fragments, and technological devices that looked suspiciously familiar. Some of them bore the distinctive markings of species that had vanished from the galaxy long before the Kethmori had even developed spaceflight. One more thing, Admiral, Morrison said, his smile taking on a different quality. Your fleet's approach vector was very impressive. Much more sophisticated than most species manage on their first visit to Earth, though I should mention that your stealth technology isn't quite as advanced as you might think. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in complete silence. Zexkar stared at the blank screen, his mind racing. Everything about this encounter violated every principle of galactic conquest he had ever learned. Primitive species were supposed to be terrified, not welcoming. They were supposed to beg for mercy, not reference extinct civilizations as if they were old acquaintances. Sir, Captain Veltar said quietly, what are your orders? Zexkar looked around his bridge at officers who had fought in 100 campaigns and never once encountered anything like this. For the first time in his career, he wasn't sure what to do next. Maintain position, he said finally, and prepare a full tactical analysis of Earth's defenses. Something tells me this is going to be more complicated than we anticipated. Outside the bridge windows, Earth continued its slow rotation, blue and peaceful and utterly mysterious. Somewhere on that quiet world, a species that had been silent for 2 millennia was preparing to teach the galaxy's apex predators their first lesson in humility. Admiral Zexkar paced the bridge of his flagship, his clawed feet clicking against the biometal floor with each step. The conversation with the human Morrison had ended 3 hours ago, but the implications still churned through his mind like acid. No species had ever greeted the Kethmori fleet with such casual confidence, and certainly none had claimed knowledge of extinct civilizations. "Admiral," Captain Valtar approached cautiously, "the crew is requesting orders." "Should we begin the invasion?" Zexkar stopped pacing and turned to face his tactical officer. "No, first we demonstrate our power. This Morrison either doesn't understand what he's facing or he's playing some elaborate game. Either way, we need to show these humans exactly who they're dealing with." The Admiral moved to his command station and activated the fleet-wide communications system. "All ships, prepare for demonstration protocol. Target the uninhabited landmass in Grid Sector 7. We will show these humans what happens to worlds that underestimate the Kethmori." On the tactical display, a small island in Earth's Pacific Ocean appeared. The landmass was roughly 50 kilometers long and completely empty of human settlements. It would serve perfectly as a canvas for their most devastating weapon. "Charging the plasma core," reported Lieutenant Kexvaloon from the weapons station. "Estimated time to full power, 8 minutes. Zexkar nodded with satisfaction. The plasma bombardment array was the Kethmori's most feared weapon, capable of turning entire continents into molten glass. They had used it to end the resistance of the Helix Confederation and to crack the fortress worlds of the Terran Coalition. After witnessing its power, most species immediately surrendered. "Sir," Kexvaloon continued, "should we warn the humans?" "About the demonstration? No," Zexkar replied coldly. "Let them discover our capabilities firsthand. Sometimes the most effective lessons are the ones that come without warning." The bridge fell silent as the weapon charged. Through the massive viewing ports, Earth hung like a blue jewel against the star field, seemingly peaceful and defenseless. Soon, the humans would understand that their welcoming attitude was built on ignorance. "Plasma core at full power," Kexvaloon announced, "all targeting systems locked on target island." Zexkar took a deep breath, savoring the moment. "Fire!" The flagship's main weapon discharged with a sound like tearing metal and screaming wind. A beam of superheated plasma, bright as a newborn star, lanced down toward Earth's surface. The energy bolt struck the island with the force of 1,000 nuclear weapons, instantly vaporizing rock, soil, and anything else in its path. The explosion was visible from space as a column of white-hot plasma that reached into the upper atmosphere. Where the island had been, only a circular crater of molten rock remained, glowing like an ember in the ocean. Steam rose from the surrounding water as the superheated debris began to cool. "Target eliminated," Kexvaloon reported with professional satisfaction. "Complete molecular disruption achieved." Zexkar allowed himself a moment of pride. The demonstration had been perfect. No species could witness such destructive power and maintain their composure. The humans would now understand that their options were simple: surrender or face the same fate as the island. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving another transmission from Earth." "Display it," Zexkar ordered, expecting to see Morrison's confident smile replaced by terror and desperation. The screen flickered to life, showing the same simple office as before. Morrison sat behind his desk, but this time he was not alone. A woman with short brown hair and intelligent eyes stood beside him, holding a tablet device. Both humans looked completely calm. "That was quite impressive," Morrison said, his voice carrying the same warm tone as before. "Very clean energy discharge. Your plasma coherency is remarkably stable." The woman looked up from her tablet. "I'm Dr. Lisa Parker, Earth's chief xenobiologist. I've been analyzing your weapon's energy signature." The focusing array you're using is about 15% more efficient than what we've seen before. Zexkar felt his 3 hearts skip in unison. These humans were discussing his most powerful weapon as if it were a mildly interesting science experiment. Where was the fear? Where was the panic? Where were the desperate pleas for mercy? You just witnessed the complete destruction of a landmass, Zexkar said slowly. Your planet is defenseless against our weapons. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. Oh, we're quite aware of what your weapons can do. Though I have to say, your targeting systems are much more precise than what the Grimari Collective used when they tried their demonstration. They accidentally hit 3 of our research stations. Dr. Parker glanced at her tablet again. The Vorthan Empire's approach was different entirely. They used reality warping technology to simply erase matter from existence. Very effective, but it left dangerous spatial anomalies that took decades to stabilize. The bridge erupted in whispered conversations as the officers tried to process what they were hearing. These humans were not only unafraid of the Kethmori's ultimate weapon, but they were comparing it to technologies wielded by civilizations that had been extinct for centuries. You're claiming to have witnessed weapons from extinct species? Captain Veltar asked, his voice tight with disbelief. Witnessed them? Morrison chuckled. We have detailed recordings of their demonstrations. The Grimari Collective's plasma bursts were particularly spectacular, though their biomechanical targeting systems had a tendency to overheat during prolonged engagements. Dr. Parker looked up from her tablet with genuine interest. Speaking of biomechanical systems, May I ask who developed your neural interface protocols? The integration between your organic and synthetic components is fascinating. Much more stable than what we've seen from other species. Zexkar stared at the screen in growing horror. These humans were not just claiming to have met extinct civilizations, they were discussing classified military technology as if it were common knowledge. The neural interface protocols Parker mentioned were among the Kethmori's most guarded secrets. How do you know about our neural interfaces? Zexkar demanded. We've been monitoring your expansion for several decades, Morrison replied casually. Your conquest of the Kepler system was particularly well documented, though we noticed you had some difficulties with the siege of Kepler 442b logistical problems, I believe. The Admiral's blood turned to ice. The siege of Kepler 442b had been a classified operation that occurred in a completely different sector of the galaxy. The logistical problems Morrison mentioned had been a closely guarded military secret that had nearly cost them the campaign. That's, impossible, Lieutenant Kexvaloom whispered. We detected no human ships in our territory. You wouldn't? Dr. Parker said matter-of-factly. Our observation methods are somewhat more subtle than conventional spacecraft. We found that direct contact often leads to unnecessary complications. Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more serious. Admiral, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding here. You've come to Earth believing you're dealing with a primitive species that's been isolated for 2,000 years. That's not entirely accurate. Then explain yourselves, Zexkar growled, though his voice lacked its earlier authority. We didn't go silent because we were weak or destroyed, Morrison said. We went silent because we realized that most species follow a predictable pattern. They develop faster than light travel, they build empires, they become territorial and aggressive, and eventually they encounter something that teaches them humility. Dr. Parker added, usually us. The human woman brought up a holographic display that showed a map of the galaxy. Thousands of points were marked across the starfield, each one pulsing with a different color. Each of these represents a civilization that has visited Earth over the past 2 millennia. Some came to conquer, some came to study, some came to recruit us into their empires. What happened to them? Zexkar asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer. Morrison's smile returned, but it carried a different quality now. They learned. Some more quickly than others, but they all eventually understood that the galaxy is much more complex than they initially believed. The Zephyrian hegemony was particularly stubborn, Dr. Parker noted. They required 3 separate demonstrations before they accepted that their biomechanical augmentation program was fundamentally flawed. Zexkar felt the last of his confidence crumble. The Zephyrian hegemony had been legends even among the Kethmori. Their biomechanical warriors had been considered unstoppable, their technology centuries ahead of anyone else's. If these humans had somehow dealt with the hegemony, then what chance did his own fleet have? "You're saying you've encountered all these civilizations?" Captain Veltar asked. "Not encountered," Morrison corrected gently. "Educated, there's a difference." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Zexkar looked around at his officers, seeing his own confusion and growing fear reflected in their faces. Everything they thought they knew about the galaxy was being systematically dismantled by 2 humans sitting in a simple office. "Sir," Kexvolume said quietly, "what are your orders?" Zexkar stared at the tactical display showing Earth's peaceful rotation. Somewhere on that quiet world, a species that had been silent for 2 millennia was preparing to teach the galaxies. Admiral Zexkar stood in his private quarters, staring out at the blue world that had turned his understanding of the galaxy upside down. The conversation with Morrison and Parker had ended 6 hours ago, but their words echoed in his mind like a persistent alarm. His fleet, which had conquered 17 star systems, now felt like a collection of toys floating around a world that treated them as curious visitors rather than deadly invaders. Soft chime indicated someone was requesting entry. "Come," Zexkar called out, not turning from the VIEWPORT. Captain Veltar entered, carrying a datapad and wearing the expression of someone who had discovered something deeply disturbing. "Admiral, we've completed our analysis of the extinct civilizations database. The results are troubling." Zexkar finally turned to face his tactical officer. "Show me." Veltar activated the holographic display built into the quarter's central table. Images of various alien species appeared, along with their technological specifications and military capabilities. The Vorthan Empire, the Grimari Collective, the Zephyrian hegemony, all of these civilizations were significantly more advanced than we are. Their weapons could destroy entire star systems, their fleets numbered in the millions, and their technology was centuries ahead of our own. And yet they're all extinct, Zexkar said quietly. "That's what concerns me, sir. We've been operating under the assumption that these civilizations destroyed themselves or were eliminated by some natural catastrophe. But what if they encountered something that was simply more powerful than they were?" Zexkar moved to the table and studied the holographic displays. The Vorthan Empire had controlled over 3,000 star systems at its peak. The Grimari Collective had possessed biomechanical technology that made the Kethmori's augmentations look primitive. The Zephyrian hegemony had developed reality-warping capabilities that could reshape matter at the molecular level. All of these species disappeared within the last 2,000 years, Veltar continued. The same period during which Earth went silent. The implications hit Zexkar like a physical blow. "You're suggesting that Earth was responsible for their extinction?" "I'm suggesting that the timing is suspicious, sir. And the humans' knowledge of these civilizations suggests they had direct contact with them." Before Zexkar could respond, the ship's communication system activated. "Admiral, we're receiving another transmission from Earth. The humans are requesting a direct conference." Zexkar and Veltar exchanged glances. "Transfer it to my quarters," the Admiral commanded. The holographic display shifted, showing Morrison's office once again. This time, the human was joined by Parker and a younger man with sandy hair and an easy smile. Morrison gestured to the newcomer as he began speaking. "Admiral, I'd like you to meet Lieutenant Commander Steve Wilson. He's our military liaison and has been following your fleet's operations for quite some time?" Wilson nodded pleasantly. "Admiral Zexkar, Captain Veltar, it's a pleasure to finally meet you directly. I've read your tactical reports from the Helix Nebula campaigns. Very impressive work, particularly your use of biomechanical swarm tactics during the siege of Proxima Centauri." Zexkar felt his blood freeze. The siege of Proxima Centauri had been a classified operation that occurred in a completely different Sector of the galaxy. The tactical reports Wilson mentioned were stored in encrypted databases that only the highest levels of Kethmori command could access. How do you have access to classified Kethmori military records? Zexkar demanded. Wilson's smile never wavered. We've been monitoring your expansion for about 3 centuries, Admo. Your people's development from a single-world species to a multi-system empire has been fascinating to watch. Though we noticed you had some tactical difficulties during the early phases of your expansion. 3 centuries? Captain Veltar stepped forward, his biomechanical implants pulsing with agitation. Our space program is only 200 years old. Actually, it's 237 years old, Parker corrected gently. We've been observing since your first successful faster-than-light test. The energy signature from your prototype drive was quite distinctive. Morrison leaned forward in his chair. Admiral, I think it's time we had a more honest conversation. Your fleet arrived at Earth expecting to find a primitive species that had been isolated for 2 millennia. That assumption is partially correct. We did choose isolation, but isolation doesn't mean ignorance. What are you saying? Zexkar asked, though he was beginning to understand the answer. We're saying that Earth didn't go silent because we were weak or destroyed, Wilson explained. We went silent because we realized that the galaxy was full of species following predictable patterns. They develop space travel, they build empires, they become aggressive, and eventually they encounter something that teaches them about the true nature of power. Dr. Parker activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy from Earth's perspective. Thousands of points of light pulsed across the starfield, each one representing a different civilization. Over the past 2,000 years, we've observed the rise and fall of countless species. We've watched empires spanning hundreds of star systems collapse overnight. We've seen civilizations with technology that seemed unstoppable simply vanish from existence. The pattern is always the same, Morrison added. They expand aggressively, they encounter resistance, they adapt and overcome, and then they reach a point where they believe they're invincible. That's when they usually make their fatal mistake. What mistake? Zexkar asked. Though his voice had lost its earlier authority, Wilson's expression became more serious. They assume that a species that stays quiet is a species that stays weak. They interpret silence as an invitation to conquest rather than a choice to remain hidden. The young human gestured to the galactic display. Every civilization we've encountered has made this mistake. The Vorthan Empire, the Grimari Collective, the Zephyrian Hegemony, all of them arrived at Earth with fleets that dwarfed yours, all of them were certain that their technology and military might would ensure easy victory. And what happened to them? Captain Veltar asked quietly. Morrison's smile returned, but it carried a different quality now. They learned that the galaxy is much more complex than they imagined. Some learned quickly and adapted their approach. Others required more extensive education. The Vorthan Empire was particularly stubborn, Parker noted. They required 3 separate demonstrations before they accepted that their reality-warping technology wasn't as advanced as they believed. The Grimari Collective was more reasonable. They only needed 2 encounters before they understood their situation. Zexkar felt the last of his confidence crumble. You're claiming to have defeated civilizations that were more advanced than us? Defeated is such a harsh word, Wilson said. We prefer to think of it as educational intervention. The goal was never to destroy these civilizations, but to help them understand their place in the larger galactic community. But they're extinct, Veltar protested. We have no record of any of these species existing beyond their disappearance dates. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. That's because they chose to follow different paths after their encounters with us. Some decided to focus on internal development rather than external expansion. Others chose to explore regions of the galaxy far from established trade routes. A few elected to pursue purely scientific endeavors. They're not extinct, Parker explained. They're simply no longer interested in conquest and empire building. It's amazing how much a species can accomplish when they stop focusing on military expansion and start concentrating on understanding the universe around them. The implications of what the humans were saying began to sink in. Zexkar realized that his fleet wasn't facing a primitive species. They were confronting the force that had been shaping galactic civilization for 2 millennia. The mysterious disappearances, the sudden collapses of aggressive empires, the unexplained technological limitations that prevented any species from becoming truly dominant, it all had a single source. "You've been controlling galactic development," Zexkar said slowly. "Not controlling," Morrison corrected. "Guiding. There's a difference. We don't dictate what species can or cannot do. We simply ensure that no single civilization becomes powerful enough to threaten the stability of the galaxy as a whole." Wilson gestured to the display showing the Kethmori fleet. "Your people, for example, have developed impressive biomechanical integration technology. You've created a stable multi-system empire with relatively low civilian casualties. Your expansion has been methodical and generally respectful of surrendering populations, which is why we've allowed you to continue your development without interference," Parker added. "Until now? Until now?" Zexkar repeated. Morrison's expression became more serious. "Admiral, your fleet's approach to Earth represents a significant escalation in Kethmori military policy. Previous expansions targeted uninhabited systems or civilizations that pose no threat to galactic stability. But Earth is different. Earth is the center of a very delicate balance," Wilson explained. "For 2,000 years, we've maintained peace through careful observation and selective intervention. Your arrival here threatens that balance." Zexkar looked around his quarters at the artifacts of his military career weapons, trophies. The main conference room aboard Admiral Zexkar's flagship had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. Around the biometal table sat the senior officers of the Kethmori fleet, their faces showing mixtures of confusion, fear, and disbelief. The holographic display at the center of the table showed Earth rotating slowly, but now the peaceful blue world seemed less like prey and more like a predator that had been watching them from the shadows. "Admiral," Zexkar activated the communication array without preamble. "Morrison, we're ready for your briefing." The display flickered, showing the familiar office on Earth's surface. Morrison sat behind his desk with Dr. Parker and Lieutenant Commander Wilson flanking him. But this time they had additional materials. Spread across the desk documents, artifacts, and technological devices that made the Kethmori officers lean forward with professional interest. "Thank you for agreeing to this discussion, Admiral," Morrison said. "I know this situation is unusual, but we believe you'll find the information helpful in making your decision." Dr. Parker gestured to the artifacts on the desk. "We thought you might be interested in seeing some examples of the technologies we've encountered over the past 2 millennia. Each item represents a different civilization that visited Earth with intentions similar to yours." She picked up what appeared to be a crystalline weapon component. "This is from the Vorthan Empire's reality warping arsenal. They used these crystals to focus energy that could literally rewrite the laws of physics in localized areas. Very impressive technology, though it had some unfortunate side effects." Captain Veltar studied the crystal intently. "What kind of side effects?" "Temporal distortions," Wilson explained casually. "The Vorthan could reshape matter, but they couldn't prevent their weapons from creating small time loops. Eventually, their entire fleet got caught in a recursive causality error that lasted about 3 days." Lieutenant Kexvalum, the Kethmori weapons officer, shifted uncomfortably. "How did they escape the time loop?" Morrison smiled. "We helped them. Temporal mechanics isn't our specialty, but we'd encountered similar problems with the Chronarch Collective about 400 years earlier. Once we explained the mathematical principles involved, the Vorthan were able to modify their weapons to prevent future incidents." Dr. Parker set down the crystal and picked up what looked like a biomechanical neural interface. "This is from the Grimari Collective. Their hive mind technology was remarkable. They could link thousands of individuals into a single consciousness. The integration was so complete that they could coordinate fleet movements with perfect precision. We've studied the Grimari extensively, Captain Veltar said. Their biomechanical integration was considered impossible to replicate. It wasn't impossible, Wilson corrected. It was just unstable. The Grimari never solved the neural cascade problem we mentioned earlier. After 3 generations, their augmented individuals would suffer complete neurological breakdown. Parker nodded. We shared our research on biological integration with them. Once they understood the underlying principles, they were able to develop much more stable systems. Their current civilization is thriving, though they've moved beyond the need for aggressive expansion. Admiral Zexkar felt his understanding of galactic history reshaping itself with every word. You're saying these civilizations still exist? Of course they exist, Morrison replied. Why would we destroy species that could contribute to galactic knowledge? The goal was never extermination, it was education. The human leader gestured to another artifact on the desk. This is from the Zephyrian hegemony. Their warriors used biomechanical augmentations that made them nearly invincible in combat. They could regenerate lost limbs in minutes and interface directly with their weapon systems. Lieutenant Commander Wilson picked up the device, which resembled a metallic spine with glowing neural connections. The technology was beautiful, but it had a fatal flaw. The augmentations enhanced physical capabilities but gradually suppressed emotional responses. After a few decades, Zephyrian warriors became essentially emotionless killing machines. We introduced them to emotion preservation techniques, Dr. Parker added. Simple modifications to their neural interfaces that maintained empathy and creativity while preserving the combat advantages. The Zephyrian were quite grateful once they realized what they'd been losing. Captain Veltar leaned forward. How do you develop solutions to problems that advanced civilizations couldn't solve themselves? Morrison's expression became thoughtful. That's an excellent question, Captain. The answer is perspective. Each civilization we encounter has spent centuries or millennia developing along specific technological paths. They become experts in their chosen fields but often miss obvious solutions that require interdisciplinary thinking. The Vorthan were masters of reality manipulation but never studied temporal mechanics, Wilson explained. The Grimari understood hive consciousness but ignored individual neurology. The Zephyrian perfected biomechanical integration but overlooked cognitive psychology. Dr. Parker gestured to the collection of artifacts. We, on the other hand, have had 2,000 years to study the technologies and approaches of hundreds of different species. We've seen the same problem solved in dozens of different ways. What seems impossible to one civilization is often elementary to another. She activated a holographic display showing a complex technological diagram. Take your neural interface protocols, for example. They're remarkably stable, but we notice that you're using a brute force approach to prevent cascade failures. The Altarian Syndicate developed a much more elegant solution about 600 years ago. The diagram shifted, showing modifications to the Kethmori design. Admiral Zexkar stared at the display, his biomechanical implants automatically analyzing the proposed changes. The modifications were simple, elegant, and would improve efficiency by nearly 30% while reducing the risk of neural damage. You're sharing our own technology improvements with us? Zexkar asked. Why wouldn't we? Morrison replied. Knowledge belongs to everyone. The more advanced each species becomes, the more they can contribute to galactic civilization as a whole. Lieutenant. Kex Volum studied the technical specifications. These modifications would revolutionize our entire augmentation program. Why are you giving us this information? Wilson's smile became more serious. Because we want you to understand what we're offering. Earth isn't just a single world with advanced technology. We're the center of a galactic knowledge network that includes hundreds of species across thousands of star systems. Dr. Parker brought up another display showing the galaxy with interconnected lines of communication. Every civilization that's chosen to work with us rather than against us has access to this network. They share their discoveries, learn from others' experiences, and contribute to projects that benefit everyone. The Vorthan Empire is currently working on improved faster-than-light communication systems, Morrison explained. The Grimari Collective is developing new approaches to sustainable energy production. The Zephyrian hegemony is pioneering advanced medical technologies. And all of them have access to research and discoveries from every other member of the network, Wilson added. Scientific progress that would take centuries for a single species to achieve happens in decades when hundreds of civilizations work together. Captain Veltar looked around the conference table at his fellow officers. What about species that refuse to join this network? Morrison's expression became more somber. They're free to continue on their chosen paths. We don't force anyone to accept our help. However, species that insist on aggressive expansion and territorial conquest do tend to encounter obstacles. What kind of obstacles? Admiral Zexkar asked. Dr. Parker consulted her tablet. Technical difficulties, mostly. Weapon systems that mysteriously malfunction at critical moments. Navigation errors that send fleets to uninhabited systems. Communication failures that prevent coordination between ships. You sabotage their military operations, Lieutenant Kexvolume accused. We prefer to think of it as encouraging them to reconsider their priorities, Wilson said diplomatically. Most species eventually realize that cooperation is more profitable than conquest. Morrison leaned back in his chair. Admiral, your people have developed remarkable biomechanical technology and built a stable multi-system empire. You've shown restraint in your expansion and treated surrendering populations with relative mercy. These are all positive indicators. However, Dr. Parker added, your arrival at Earth represents a significant escalation in Kethmori military policy. We need to know whether your people are ready to join the galactic community as partners, or if you're determined to continue on the path of conquest. The conference room fell silent as the Kethmori officers absorbed the implications of what they'd heard. Their entire understanding of galactic civilization had been turned upside down. The mysterious disappearances of advanced species, the technological limitations that prevented any empire from becoming truly dominant, the careful balance of power that had maintained relative peace for centuries, it all had a single source, Admiral. Zexkar looked around the table at officers who had fought in 100 campaigns and never once imagined that their victories had been allowed rather than earned. Admiral Zexkar stood alone in his quarters, staring at the tactical display that showed his fleet's position around Earth. 12 hours had passed since the humans' final briefing, and his senior officers were waiting for his decision. The weight of his entire civilization's future pressed down on him like the gravity of a collapsing star. The door chimed, and Captain Veltar entered without waiting for permission. Admiral, the fleet commanders are requesting orders. Some of them are suggesting we withdraw and reassess our situation. And the others? Zexkar asked, not turning from the display. They want to test the humans' capabilities directly. Commander Thexmore believes this could all be an elaborate deception, designed to make us retreat without a fight. Zexkar finally turned to face his tactical officer. What do you think, Veltar? The captain's biomechanical implants pulsed slowly as he considered the question. I think we're facing something completely outside our experience, sir. Everything we've learned about galactic civilization has been wrong. If the humans are telling the truth, then we've been playing a game where we didn't even know the rules. And if they're lying, then they're the most sophisticated liars in galactic history. The technical specifications they showed us, the knowledge of our classified operations, the detailed information about extinct civilizations, it would require resources and intelligence-gathering capabilities that dwarf anything we've ever seen. Zexkar moved to his desk and activated the communication system. Morrison, are you available for one final conversation? The display flickered to life, showing the familiar office on Earth's surface. This time, Morrison was alone, sitting behind his desk with a cup of what appeared to be some kind of beverage. He looked relaxed, as if he were conducting a routine business meeting rather than negotiating with an invasion fleet. Of course, Admiral. Have you reached a decision? I have. Questions first, Zexkar replied. You've shown us technology from extinct civilizations and offered to share knowledge that could advance our people by centuries. What do you gain from this arrangement? Morrison took a sip from his cup before answering. Peace of mind, mostly. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Admiral. There are threats out there that make your fleet look like a training exercise. The more advanced and cooperative the galactic community becomes, the better prepared we all are to face those threats. The Andromeda Convergence, among others. The convergence is just the most immediate concern. There are entities in deep space that make them look peaceful by comparison. The void touched, for example, or the synthetic collectives from the galactic rim. Zexkar felt a chill run down his spine. You're saying there are worse threats than the convergence? Much worse. The convergence at least wants to preserve useful resources and populations. The void touched consume everything they encounter, converting matter and energy into something that exists outside normal spacetime. The synthetic collectives view biological life as a contamination that needs to be eliminated. Morrison set down his cup and leaned forward. This is why we need strong, cooperative civilizations, Admiral. Isolated species, no matter how advanced, cannot stand against these threats alone. But working together, sharing knowledge and resources, we have a chance. How do we know you won't simply use us for your own purposes? Captain Veltar asked, stepping into view of the communication system. Because we don't need to, Morrison replied simply. Captain, Earth could have destroyed your fleet the moment you dropped out of hyperspace. We could have eliminated the Kethmori Empire decades ago if we'd wanted to. The fact that you're here, alive and unharmed, should tell you something about our intentions. The human leader gestured toward something off-screen. Let me show you something that might help clarify our position. The display changed, showing a view from space of Earth's surface. But this wasn't the peaceful blue world the Kethmori had been observing. Hidden beneath the planet's seemingly primitive exterior were structures of impossible size and complexity. Cities that spanned continents, orbital elevators reaching into space, and energy networks that pulsed with power beyond anything in the Kethmori's experience. This is Earth as it actually exists, Morrison explained. We've learned to hide our true capabilities behind holographic projections and energy dampeners. Most visiting species see only what we want them to see. The view expanded, showing the space around Earth. What had appeared to be empty void was actually filled with defensive installations, shipyards, and structures that defied easy categorization. The Kethmori fleet, which had seemed so powerful, was revealed to be floating in the middle of the most advanced military complex either of them had ever seen. Why show us this? Zexkar asked quietly. Because you need to understand the choice you're making, Morrison replied. This isn't a negotiation between equals, Admiral. This is an invitation to join something much larger than yourselves. Doctor. Parker appeared on screen, joining Morrison at his desk. We've been monitoring your fleet's communications, Admiral. Some of your officers are suggesting that you test our capabilities directly. I want to make sure you understand what that would mean. She activated a holographic display showing the Kethmori flagship. Your biomechanical augmentations are impressive, but they rely on quantum neural networks that operate on specific frequencies. Those frequencies can be disrupted. As she spoke, Admiral Zexkar felt his augmentations begin to tingle strangely. The sensation wasn't painful, but it was unmistakably artificial. His enhanced reflexes slowed, his tactical analysis systems flickered, and his neural interface connections became sluggish. This is just a demonstration, Dr. Parker said gently. We're not causing any permanent damage. But I wanted you to understand that resistance isn't really an option. The strange sensation stopped, and Zexkar's augmentations returned to normal function. Around him, Captain Veltar was checking his own systems with obvious alarm. You can disable our biomechanical systems remotely? Veltar asked. We can do many things, Lieutenant Commander Wilson said, appearing on screen alongside Morrison and Parker. But we prefer not to. Cooperation works better than coercion, Morrison nodded. Admiral, we're not your enemies. We're offering your people a chance to become part of something extraordinary. But the choice has to be yours. Zexkar looked around his quarters one final time, seeing the artifacts of his military career in a new light. The weapons, trophies, and decorations that had once filled him with pride now seemed like the toys of a child who had stumbled into an adult's world. What would joining your network mean for the Kethmori Empire? It would mean access to technologies and knowledge that would advance your civilization by centuries, Parker explained. It would mean participation in projects that span multiple star systems and involve dozens of species. It would mean security against threats that could otherwise destroy your entire people. But it would also mean giving up the path of conquest, Wilson added. Species in our network focus on exploration, research, and mutual cooperation rather than territorial expansion through force, Morrison smiled. Though I should mention that there's plenty of room for expansion in the galaxy. The network controls thousands of uninhabited systems that are perfect for colonization. The difference is that you'd be settling empty worlds rather than conquering occupied ones. Admiral Zexkar felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. Everything his people had believed about their place in the galaxy was wrong. They weren't apex predators, they were students in a classroom they'd never known existed. If we agree to join your network, what happens to our fleet? You return to Kethmori space and begin the process of cultural transition, Morrison replied. We'll provide technical advisors to help integrate new technologies and educational specialists to help your people understand their new role in galactic civilization. The process usually takes about 50 years, Parker added. Some species adapt more quickly, others need more time. We work at whatever pace is comfortable for each civilization. Zexkar took a deep breath and made the decision that would change his people's destiny forever. I accept your offer on behalf of the Kethmori Empire. We choose cooperation over conquest. Morrison's smile brightened. Excellent decision, Admiral. Dr. Parker, would you mind preparing the orientation materials? And Wilson, please contact the Cultural Integration Department. We'll need to arrange accommodations for our new partners. As the transmission ended, Admiral Zexkar turned to Captain Veltar. Send a message to all ship commanders. We're returning to Kethmori space, but not as conquerors. We're going home as students, ready to learn our place in a galaxy far more complex and wonderful than we ever imagined. Outside his quarters viewport, Earth continued its peaceful rotation. But now Zexkar understood that the blue world wasn't just another planet. It was the quiet center of a civilization that had been watching over the galaxy for 2 millennia, ensuring that species like his own had the chance to grow, learn, and eventually join something greater than themselves. The invasion was over, but the education was just beginning.